Good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you are. Welcome to Dreams Realized, Addressing Disparities and Promoting Equity Through Universal Preschool. First, let me introduce myself. My name is Dr. Michael Olnick. I'm the CEO and President of Child Care Resource Center. We are a multi-dimensional agency providing resources to children and families, providers, and communities across a 22,500 square mile service area in Southern California. This event is made possible by our event sponsor, First 5 LA. I'm your moderator for today's webinar. We will monitor Q&A and will take questions after our panelists have spoken. This event is recorded and will be shared with registered participants. This event is also made possible by our fellow bill co-sponsors, Every Child California, First 5 California, and the California Child Care Resource and Referral Network. I'm glad to welcome Senator Connie Leyva, who will provide you an overview of California's Senate Bill 976, the Universal Preschool Act. Senator Leyva is the key legislative champion for this bill and a longtime advocate for children and their families. Senator Leyva, we know that you have limited time this morning, and we appreciate you taking the time to introduce SB 976.
Thank you, Dr. Olnick. It's a pleasure to be here with all of you. Thank you for that warm introduction. I have loved working with CCRC over the past several years. And, something people ask me a lot is, oh, what do you love the best about being in the Senate? And I always say I've met amazing organizations that do amazing work that I would have never had the opportunity to work with. So CCRC definitely falls into that group. And I appreciate everything that you continue to do for quality childcare and educational opportunities for families across California. Thank you, thank you, thank you. As a California State Senator and as a mother of twins who both have their own children now, my grandchildren, I really do know the importance of early childcare education as well as finding care for young children. I still remember, my girls are 30, but I still remember how hard it was to find care so that I could go do my job and a place where they could be and be safe, and then I could go be Connie Leyva. So early child care is so important for working families, but also for the children so that they're ready for their future. It is vital that we offer flexibility and options for working families with children who would benefit from transitional kindergarten, but are unable to access those services because of their own responsibilities and their day-to-day work. And that is why I authored SB 976 earlier this year. I love this bill to make sure that families will continue to have high quality and full day options for their early learners. Last year, as you know, the legislature passed and the governor signed SB 130, which authorized universal transitional kindergarten, which is great, but not always great for working parents. So SB 976 builds upon that work that was previously completed for transitional kindergarten so that California has the necessary expanded infrastructure in place for childcare for working families. Practically speaking, SB 976 would build out a complementary mixed delivery community-based system to ensure families have options to meet the needs of early care and learning for their children. With a mixed delivery system, parents with young children would have the needed flexibility for care, such as early drop-off, late pickup, weekend care, and year-round care. This proposal, which already has earned so much support from parents and groups across the state, will also help to protect the stability of jobs for teachers at the community-based providers, which employ 98% women and primarily women of color. It would also be so devastating if these care facilities in the community close, since families would then have fewer options for their children and many providers would lose their jobs and facilities would have to close. We just simply can't let that happen. We know that childcare and early education was one of the hardest hit sectors during the pandemic, and recovery of our economy depends on the availability of early learning options for all working parents. SB 976 is so important. It will establish a free universal system of preschool by expanding access to the state school program for all 3 and 4-year-old children, regardless of family income, and expands the types of childcare providers who may be eligible to offer state preschool. This bill will help to make sure that parents have the option to send their children to a public elementary school provider or a community-based provider to benefit from universal preschool. So thank you so much for your interest, and thank you so much for everything that you do. I hope you enjoy the remainder of your conference, and I want to thank you for inviting me. And Dr. Olenek, back to you.
Thank you very much, Senator Leyva. Of course, I put myself on, oh, it says I'm still muted. I put myself on mute and now I can't seem to get myself off.
We can hear you though.
You can hear me. Okay, there we
Yes.
go. All right, so next on our agenda here is, I want to thank Senator Leyva for your generous time continuing to serve as a fearless leader for California's children, families, and the early care and learning workforce. And now I'd like to introduce Dr. Dale Ferran. Dr. Farran, Ph.D., is Emerita Professor, Peabody College at Vanderbilt University, and has been involved in research and intervention for high-risk children and youth all her professional career, including as a researcher on the Abecedarian Project for 10 years, and longitudinal evaluations of pre-K curricula and developing measures and strategies to improve programs for young children from poor families. Most recently, she led the only randomized controlled trial of a statewide pre-kindergarten run through the public school systems. Thank you, Dr. Farran, for joining us for this important conversation about key considerations for our universal preschool system. And let me start by asking you if you could describe the Tennessee pre-K program and the evaluation you conducted.
Yes, I thank you so much. I'm really, I can't tell you how pleased I am that there are people who are paying attention to the results of our research, especially as states like California consider how to serve children under kindergarten age. So Tennessee was a little bit late to the game in terms of having a statewide pre-K. They funded the full program in 2005. And by 2007, my partner, Mark Lipsey, and I, he's the methodologist in the group, I'm the early childhood person. We worked with the State Department, the Tennessee Department of Education, who they were very interested in evaluating their program and doing it rigorously. And so we couldn't have done this work without that partnership. They identified districts for us that were oversubscribed. That meant there were more people who wanted their children to attend preschool, a pre-K program, than there were spots. And so working with us, we did what would be the equivalent of a lottery draw. That is, you took your chances and you got in or you didn't get in. And what that meant was the children who'd gotten in became our treatment group, if you will, and the children who didn't get in became the comparison or control group. And they were entirely equivalent. In Tennessee, it's not a universal program. You qualify if you're eligible, if you qualify for free and reduced price lunch. So these were all poor families, and they were all motivated to get their children into pre-K. They all applied and then got their children to the center for it to be determined whether or not they got in. So that meant we didn't just have a comparison of apples to apples. We actually had Macintosh apples to Macintosh apples. And we know that in every respect, these two groups were equivalent, both in the characteristics of the children and in the characteristics of the families. And we started following them from pre-K. Now, we don't get state data until like kindergarten and beyond. And this becomes important as we talk about what California might do. But we consented a group, about a third of the group, to allow us to actually assess their children at the beginning of pre-K, at the end of pre-K, and first, second, and third grades. So, and then we began getting then we got we supplemented that information with information from the state database. So we've been following them. Now we have funding to follow them through the end of high school.
Great. Dr. Farran, can you tell us a little bit about what just the demographic breakdown was of the kids?
Right. So Tennessee is a rural state, and it's a rural state with a lot of white poverty. So about 60% of our population was white, or whatever that is. 20% were African American, and about 14% were Hispanic. And we had about 14% of the population were English language learners. So this population is from across the state of Tennessee.
Great. So when this was instituted, what happened to the private market?
I think that's a great question, and it's one that isn't studied enough. I don't think that's been studied in Tennessee. I know that there's a researcher at Brown University who's done a lot of this work, and she has found that in states where this has been studied, when public money comes in and siphons off the 4-year-olds, private programs have to either close or really increase their fees, because your 4-year-olds allow you to care for your 0 to 3-year-olds. The cost of care for 0 to 3 is really huge. The cost of care for 4s is a little bit less. And by equalizing that, you can supplement the cost of your 0 to 3s. When you pull the 4-year-olds off, it's not possible to do that anymore. And so a lot of programs are struggling. The more children we support with public money, as 4-year-olds, the harder it is for these programs in an already very fragile childcare system that we have in this country. So what did you find out? What's happened to these kids now that you've been following them for a while? All right, so here we go. So at the end of pre-K, the children who'd been, I should say that it's Tennessee. So, and this was in the 2009, 2010. So 63% of the children who did not get into pre-K were cared for by kin. That is either their parents or their aunties or their grandparents. So they were not in any formal program. And when our pre-K children entered kindergarten, compared to the children who'd been in the comparison group, most of whom had not been in a formal program, on school readiness skills, they looked much better. They were significantly better prepared for school on those very concrete sort of school readiness skills. And their kindergarten teachers actually rated them as being better prepared for kindergarten. They knew how to do school. They knew how to line up. They knew how to sit in a circle. They knew how to go to the cafeteria. They knew those things that didn't have to be taught in kindergarten. By the end of kindergarten, so everybody loved us. So this was the first rigorous RCT, randomized controlled trial, like you see in medicine and stuff, the first rigorous study, and it proved that pre-K benefited children in terms of their school entry skills. So we were heroes. Unfortunately, we kept following the children. So we followed them. By the end of kindergarten, all those differences had disappeared. So basically, it took the control group 1 year to learn what it took the treatment group, the VPK group, 2 years to learn. So by the end of kindergarten, there were no differences. That was not completely unexpected, but what was unexpected is that as we went along and children were in the 2nd and 3rd grade, we began to see differences in favor of the control group. And by 3rd grade on state achievement tests, the children who did not attend pre-K were scoring higher on math and science than the children who did. We kept following them. By 6th grade, the children who did not attend were scoring higher in all 3 areas, reading, math, and science. That was surprising. It made a lot of people upset with us. What was more alarming to me even was that in the one social emotional sort of outcome that we had, which was suspensions and expulsions for disciplinary offenses, the children who had been in pre-K were significantly more likely to be suspended or expelled. Initially, in 3rd grade, it started for what we call minor offenses, that is, you school rule violations, you wear your hat backwards, you don't tuck in your shirt, you speak disrespectfully to a teacher, things that wouldn't get you disciplined on the street, but do get you disciplined in school. By sixth grade, they were also more likely to be expelled for major violations, bullying, fighting, harassment, those kinds of things that are significant behavior problems. So our concern is that we're seeing both an effect on achievement, and we're also seeing an effect on behavior that's in the wrong direction. And so we've spent a lot of time trying to talk to people about this.
So now that you found this out, what was the reaction of the powers that be in terms of hearing these results?
Well, so I think so their reaction is in Tennessee is that they want to try, they narrowed the range of curricular choices that could be made. They're trying to provide more professional development for teachers. Any state has a far-flung program. It is extremely difficult for the central state Department of Education to monitor, provide support for, and help to make quality happen. And I believe that in all the classrooms, and I believe what happens is when you make pre-K, the grade below kindergarten, it is almost impossible for that program to avoid the push down from the K-12, the K-8, K-5 classrooms that are ahead of it. It's very hard to protect pre-K once it's in a public schools, and 93% of the Tennessee classrooms were in public schools, public elementary schools.
So you said that they made some changes in terms of curriculum and all that, but you also, I think when I read your report, you also said that licensed, or what we would call credentialed teachers, did not make a difference in terms of how the kids did.
So I haven't done that study, but because everybody in Tennessee, the program in Tennessee requires that every teacher be licensed. It also pays teachers at parity with the K-12 system. So teachers who teach in the pre-K program in Tennessee are paid twice, 3 times as much as teachers in the community childcare program classrooms. So not only that, but they get benefits and retirement. So they are paid at parity with K-12. There have been a number of studies. The latest one that I have seen is in 2018 that have shown that a licensed teacher does not make either for better quality or for better child outcomes in classrooms. Primarily, I would say because our licensure really focuses on elementary school, and just adding some hours of child development training does not erase the perspective that one gains by being in a teacher education program. I was a faculty member in a teacher education program at Vanderbilt for more than 20 years. And I can tell you that the focus is really on didactic, teaching how to read, teaching something about math, controlling the classroom. It's really not much at all on differentiation, something that's critically important when children are 4 to 6 years of age and are so idiosyncratic in their development.
So this reminds me of, I think I texted you last night and said that this looked like what I saw almost 40 years ago when I was collecting data for my dissertation in terms of the number of programs that were really didactic and what happened to those kids. And I said, now we know. So what do you suggest that we do? What are the lessons that I've learned that we need to apply moving forward?
If I could do anything at the sort of the end of my career, it would be to make some sort of effect on what's going on for you. I'm so concerned about our 4-year-olds, especially our 4-year-olds from vulnerable families, from families that already have a lot of stress. So our data, in addition to doing this pre-K study. I also have done several studies that involve observing in classrooms. I myself personally have been in a lot of classrooms, and I really would like some of the legislators who are advocating to actually go spend some time in real classrooms. And our data match those that are coming out of Massachusetts, out of Georgia, out of Ohio and Virginia, which say that these pre-K programs that are in the public schools are very didactic with a lot of teacher-led instruction based on focused on basic skills. Children are hardly ever listened to. Teachers talk the majority of the time. When they ask children questions, they are right answer single word questions like, what letter is this? What number is this? What color is this? And there's almost no interactions where children are asked to think like, what do you think will happen next? Or why do you think he felt that way? Or have you ever felt that way? Those kinds of conversations, critical as they are very hard to have in a whole group of 20 children. But I understand that in California, you're even talking about 24 children in the classroom. So yeah, I think it's just really, really hard to create the kinds of classrooms we would want to put our children and grandchildren in once they get into the public schools. That's my conclusion. Not a happy one.
Well, and we've been having this discussion for a very long time. So thank you, Dr. Farran, for giving us some illumination in terms of what went on in Tennessee. And we have, you see in the chat or in the Q&A, I'm not quite sure where it is because it just popped up, but Donna Sneringer, who's our Chief Strategy Officer, has posted your study in a link that we have. So anybody who would like to see more information than we were able to cover today can go there and look at that, or you can go and read the entire study if you'd like to do that. So, but I really appreciate all the work that you've done for a very long time, but especially this study right now. I think,
and we do have a couple quick questions for
Okay.
Dr. Farran and follow-up. We had someone ask if you could define and explain what push down curriculum means in your mind.
Well, I think what's happening in a lot of elementary schools, especially schools that serve a majority of high poverty children, is that the third grade teachers feel that they're under the gun for having children learn to read and passing those state tests. And so they tend to blame the second grade teachers, who then, well, okay, then I'm going to blame even in kindergarten, there's been a recent study Daphne Bossack did, where she looked at expectations of kindergarten teachers just 20 years ago. So 20 years ago, kindergarten teachers didn't think that academic preparation was so necessary for going into kindergarten. The latest survey of kindergarten teachers say 86% of them think children should read before they leave kindergarten. That's a huge push down into kindergarten. And so what will happen is exactly the same thing will happen, is that you will get a push down into pre-K of focusing on those sorts of academic readiness skills and blame for children not being ready to handle the next grade's work.
And then the last question we'll take before we move on, we had several people ask about what the differences were with kith and kin care and what might have been some of the benefits children received from kith and kin care that we could learn from as we look at our overall childcare system.
So we're very interested in this. Now, again, my colleague, Mark, cautions me, we didn't randomly assign children to stay home, right? The control group, the majority of them, that's what they decided to do. So we have to be very careful investigating that. But our preliminary investigations suggest that those are the children who are actually doing the best long-term. And I'm coming to realizations late in my life that I should have come to much earlier, which is that we have biases against poor families. We just assume that being home is a bad thing if you have a poor family. Well, that's not necessarily true. It is true that poor families sometimes are very stressed and whatever. But when you talk about the freedom to sort of run around, the freedom to interact with multi-age children in the neighborhood, those kinds of things, maybe I can't tell you what's causing the difference, but I can tell you it looks like that was a better environment for children.
Interesting. Okay, thank you, Dr. Farran, for Dale, for your contribution this morning. I really appreciate it. A lot of things to think about. And you're right. I mean, didactic what I'm walking away, it confirms things that I've thought for the last long time, which is didactic instruction doesn't really work that well for kids when they're 3 and 4 years old. And that when you're trying to control large groups of kids, you do a lot of behavior control. And if you do that, you really don't have time for the socio-emotional or executive functioning kinds of activities that kids do. And I wouldn't be surprised that a lot of those kids that are doing kith and kin stuff were also taking advantage of other kinds of activities that were more conducive to being a 3 and a 4 year old. And I'll share with you that I started my career actually as being a kindergarten teacher back in the 70s in a full day, full year program. And we didn't think about having kids be able to learn. We thought that that's what you did in kindergarten, is start to learn how to read. Not in kindergarten, but you started with the colors and numbers and all that kind of stuff, but you really started to read when you're in first grade. And it's getting pushed down and all that. On the other end of the scale is I took calculus when I was in college. My sons took calculus their junior year of high school. I don't think either of them were really ready for it. One of them actually took calculus in college and did very well, but he couldn't pass the AP test in high school. So there you go. A lot of this push down stuff does not make for better citizens, I don't think. So thank you once again about these considerations. And now we're going to hear a little bit about some people who've been impacted and are supporting the SB 976. So we're going to show a short little video that our dynamic government relations team has been hard at work gathering direct voices of providers and families, and we'll share that with you now.
So let's go ahead and jump into parent interviews.
Hi, my name's Mona. I have 2 children that attend Oak Tree Learning Center. Oak Tree has been the best option for our family because my husband and I both work full-time. So we're able to drop them off first thing in the morning. They open at 6:30. I get here about 6:45 and drop them off. And then we can pick them up when we come home from work. So I'm usually here right before 6 p.m. to pick them up. My children have benefited most from the center in their development. This center works off of more of a hands-on approach rather than worksheets and things like that. So the kids are able to really interact with other children and create projects and things where they learn some real hands-on life skills.
My name is Jacqueline Escobar. I have 1 child named Nicholas. He is 5. He started here when he was about 2.5. We were looking for diversity. We were looking for exposure. Our son is an only child, so socialization was a big thing for us. Communication too was really well. Because our son was an only child, there was a bit of an attachment with leaving him, both from his end and our end. And the director here worked really well, and his teacher, to help bridge that connection to make him comfortable and excited to be leading us for all day.
As you just heard, there are many reasons why families need different preschool options. And yes, the expansion of universal transitional kindergarten was beneficial for many families, but others will require longer hours of care and individual needs of children.
With the Universal Preschool Bill introduced by Senator Connie Leyva, it will go ahead and invest in the mixed delivery system. This includes community-based and private child care centers, as well as local school agencies. And it will provide families a choice on which is best for their children to go ahead and meet their needs, to meet their schedules and their preferences.
Let's check in now with Senator Connie Leyva to talk more about this important legislation.
We must create a system that not only works for families, but also uplifts providers by ensuring that they have the ability to open their doors to more children and pay their employees a living wage. We are very excited to work on this bill and make sure that we have proper care for our children so that moms and dads can go to work and our youngest learners are learning.
So by establishing a preschool system that is universal, not uniform, SB 976 gives families a true choice without an added cost.
And since the Universal Preschool Bill will support all provider types, now we're going to go ahead and move into provider interviews. And for our first guest, we have Miss Jennifer Carter, and she has centers in LA and San Bernardino.
Jennifer, tell us what kind of curriculum you have at your center.
In a school center setting, we're built to have one-on-one interactions, individualized care, and a curriculum that really supports 4-year-olds.
How do you think including centers like yours will benefit the mixed delivery system?
Including small centers and private centers like Oak Tree really makes for a robust overall system for all parents and all students. We have flexibility. We have a wide range of experiences for children. We have a wide range of expertise in child development, both as young children and then as children are transitioning into elementary school.
Thank you for your time. Now we want to check in with our next provider, Ricardo Rizzo. He operates a family childcare in Los Angeles.
Ricardo, how is your family childcare flexible for families?
We open Monday through Friday from 6 a.m. to 7 p.m. We have, the parents can come, they can drop out their kids. Doesn't necessarily need, they have to be dropped off at the exact time. They can drop them up later.
Why do you think families choose you as a provider?
We have the time for them. We take care of them as we taking care of our own kids. We give them love. That's the number one thing they need. They also see that they're learning. They go home and they see that the kids are learning new things every day.
What do you predict the future of all 4-year-olds would be in California?
How they're going to do this, I really don't know. But if they include us in that, I think it will benefit a lot. Not only us, but the parents.
Truly, the Universal Preschool Bill will provide free access and education to families looking for any kind of program or provider type. With Senator Leyva's bill, it would also increase the infrastructure efficiency that we have here in California. This means that it would provide classrooms that are already used for age-appropriate settings, and there will no longer be a need to have additional costs to build new infrastructure for classrooms for TK.
This vision creates full-day, full-year programs to meet the needs of parents for those who work full-time or go to school full-time and during non-traditional hours.
Yes, and especially the mixed delivery system will definitely benefit greatly because they are essential workers in our community as well.
That's all we have for today.
And thank you so much. Please visit our website and social media to stay informed and how you can advocate.
For more information, visit ccrcca.org.
Okay, so you've heard from Dr. Farran, you've heard from some providers, you've heard from some of our staff. We'd like to hear from you. So if you've got comments or questions, please throw them in the chat. And in the meantime, rather than us reading them off, because you did hear a couple of questions, we'll collect those and then we'll post them on our website. But we do want to move on to our next speaker, Dr. Iruka, Iheoma Iruka, who is a research professor in public policy, a fellow in the Frank Porter Graham Child Development Institute, and the founding director of the Equity Research Action Coalition at Frank Porter Graham at UNC Chapel Hill. Dr. Iruka is leading projects and initiatives focused on ensuring that minority children and children from low-income households, especially Black children, are thriving. Sorry, I'm losing my place here. Through the intersection of anti-bias, anti-racist, culturally grounded research, program, and policy. Some focus areas include family engagement and support, quality rating and improvement systems, and early care and education system and programs. Dr. Iruka serves on numerous national and local boards and committees, including the National Advisory Committee for the U.S. Census Bureau, National Academies of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine, the American Psychological Association's Board of Educational Affairs, the Brady Education Foundation, and Trust for Learning. And given the fact that it seems like every week I get a notification that you've got another article out there or you're studying something else, I assume that you don't sleep. So, and I do have to say that I noticed it came out yesterday that you're working on the ECHRS number 3, looking at equity and quality. And I have to disclose that I used the ECHRS number 1 back in the 80s when it first came out. And I can tell you from then that there were pieces of it I knew didn't work so well. So it's nice to know that after all this time, it's being revised again. So we want to hear from you in terms of universal preschool and need for equity, and if you would share your considerations for a universal preschool system.
Well, thank you so much for having me, and thank you for the connection to the ECHRS. I'm just doing analysis to see what is equitable, and you clearly know that it has some places to go. And so glad to be here. And of course, it's always a pleasure to be on the same panel as Dr. Farran, and just to hear sort of her remarks regarding Tennessee. So I would just, I won't take too long, but I think I want to flag a few things about the issue of universality, and when we think about equity. And before I do that, I do want to make sure that I sort of really, I think, take the baton from Dr. Farran, and I think really call attention to the importance of sort of, for us to get to equity, we have to think about equity and quality, right? They have to go hand in hand. And so while people may be surprised by the Tennessee study, a lot of us in the field already anticipated what it was going to say because we knew in terms of the structure. So I think it's important that we think about the issue of equity and quality really together. And so, I'm really happy, at least for you all in California, I'm in North Carolina, to hear that you're going to have a universal system. But what I do want to make sure that as you think about this universal system, that we recognize that when you have universal systems, a lot of times we can almost guarantee, unfortunately, that there's going to be some inequities if it's not attended to, right? So I want to sort of flag that, at least minimally, based on what I'm reading from the sort of the Universal Preschool Act, right? That is going to be accessible, is going to include a mixed delivery system, and I think all the great marks of what hopefully be a really equitable universal system. But we have to look at some of our data, right? We look at New York City, we look at Boston. We do continue to see specifically that Black children and Latina children are likely to be in programs that are deemed lower quality, right? So that's something important. So even if you have a universal system that still has sort of the, whether it's the same teacher credentials, the same resources, the same PD, there's still, even within the universality, there's still something that penetrates it that still ensures that certain groups of kids are going to still be in low quality programs. So I think that's something really important that we attend to, is to not kind of get sort of mired in the universality of it. If we don't recognize the universality, usually eventual mean is the implementation of it, right? And also knowing that we're living within a structure, right? So, some of us may not know why is it that Black kids and Latino kids continue to be in low quality programs. Part of it is that it's a historical sort of legacy of systemic racism, right? That still puts people in particular, locations, that makes it where only particular, workforce can teach there. So we have to really make sure that as you look at universality implementation, that you begin to configure who is going to have access to the high quality program. So that's one big thing I want to flag. The other thing I do want to make sure that I flag is that I appreciate the language of mixed delivery system. We have heard this before, but the question is, what are the mechanisms that, for example, kith and kin care, how do they get into the system? How do home-based programs get into the system? How do those non-school programs get into the system? How do those non-school providers in those programs get into the system, right? Because we do know that K-12 as an entity has often majority been primarily white people, white women. And whereas on the other side of this bifurcated system, we know that many of our women of color, Black, Latina, Indigenous immigrants, they're not able to quote unquote meet the credentialing and meet the praxis requirement and all the other kind of testing to get into the K-12 system. So for me, it'd be really important that there's a clear understanding about who gets into the system, how they get there. Are there barriers to that, right? So for example, if you're like, okay, everybody gets to get in the system, but you need a credential in X, Y, and Z. And now the question is, are all the people in the sort of in the community-based programs from the kith and care, can they make it into all those? So are there thresholds to entry that we need to really look at? And are those thresholds necessary? And are those thresholds predictive, right? So for example, if you're like, oh, we need to make sure that you are licensed in X, Y, and Z, is there data to support that level of threshold is necessary, right? So I think so I feel like it's important that we look at the implementation of how that occurs. The other thing I would actually also flag in the universal system is what are the things that go into it? So for example, what are the standards, right? What does it mean, right? So say you are a Latino majority sort of program, right? And are the standards that are being required, are they aligned and culturally valid for the community you work for? Is there anything around the language part, right? So we know California is one of the most diverse, linguistically diverse states in our union. And so are there going to be alignment that ensures that we have a workforce that's able to be both culturally aligned, linguistically aligned, but even racially, culturally aligned with the children that they're serving, the families they're serving? So for me, is looking at that part as well. And then the assessments, right? I'm assuming it's going to be a whole lot of assessments to make sure that this works. And again, that's why I will push on, what are the assessments? Are they culturally, linguistically, and racially valid? Because I would say, colleagues and I have written a paper that really challenges even the notion of the achievement gap, right? We're not saying that we don't want to focus on it, but what we are saying is that we have to sort of make sure that we're capturing the fullness of children's competencies. Right now, many of our assessments are very narrow. I think to Dr. Farran's earlier point, they're very, very narrow. So it's either that this particular language, this particular thing that people can test you easily on. We're not able to test on critical skills. We don't even test on oral language or storytelling. And we know that's a skill set that Black children in particular, and even some of our Latino and our Indigenous children are really strong in. We don't measure that. We don't test that. We don't even teach that in our pedagogy, right? So I think we need to think through the assessments and the standards. I would even say that we need to make sure that as we look at the universal system, what do you do to make sure that it reaches the kids, one, but it also, you're not in some ways taking advantage of the workforce. And so when we talk about universal system, does that mean that the workforce in the community-based programs are going to be not just paid equally, but we have to recognize there's a different level of taxation when you are a community-based provider, right? That means that, you don't have the benefit of only being open 8 to 5. You don't have the benefit of having all of this infrastructure that has been sort of created over centuries. You don't have a lot of support in many, many ways. There's a lot of protection of educators that may not be there. And is it going to be provided for our community-based, operators? So I think that there needs to be at least if it's not already thought about, there needs to be a much more of a deeper insight about equality is not the same as equity. And if you want a mixed delivery system that's universal, we have to make sure that we address equity. And equity, in my definition, is this: it has to be fair. And it has to also address injustices. And if we know that many community-based programs are already operating on a deficit on many levels, they've been literally, working for, 24 hours a day through a pandemic and beyond. They're the ones that people go to when, suspension expulsion happens. They're the ones that are connecting families to all kinds of social support. They do a lot. They do a lot to support a community. They do a lot to stabilize the community, but they're often not viewed as educators. They don't get the same same value add. So I would think it's important that when we think about equity in this universal system, that we really make sure that we are centering those community-based providers in ways that we often don't do that. And then I'll just finally make sure I flag that as we think about a universal system, that we think about even the early intervention group, right? We know that a lot of children, especially following the pandemic, but before that we need to think about how is this universal system ensuring that we don't have inequities in our early intervention. We don't have inequities in terms of our funding. We don't have inequities in terms of how families are being treated in many ways. And we don't have inequities in sort of the development of the workforce as well. So I'll pause there, but there's a lot that for me, while I'm really happy, I get a little tense when I hear universal. And then there's sort of this hope that we all wish for. And then the delivery really leaves a lot of people of color, a lot of marginalized communities kind of just hoping and praying that it gets better.
So Iheoma, I have a question for you. See if I can get it out there right. You mentioned something about educators versus people working with younger kids in the private sector not being considered educators. And there's a lot of discussion about quality and play and things like that. And do you think that the word play actually is to the detriment of the people that are providing the services because it's not education?
Oh, see, and I feel like this is our fault. And I say us as sort of the early childhood, child development sort of world and researchers. We know that children literally learn through play. If you go to any of the, what we say, majority white, higher income settings, like our Montessori's or Reggio, literally they are playing, like kids are and play. I think I agree with you that sometimes, almost like when we think about the child care, we think babysitter. We when we think about education, we think about K-12. So for me, I feel like part of it is that we as an early childhood community, researchers, practitioners, all of us, we need to make sure that we don't take away the word play, right? We can, but we may need to make sure we define it, right? That play is the process where children learn to be brilliant, right? That is that's almost like how when we do our work, they don't question us about doing work. That is their work. Their work of education is play. That is the most child appropriate and what you want a child to be is to learn through play. If you do it another way, which is more of this didactic, instructional, controlling kind of way, we have seen evidence is not working. I mean, I'm not sure how else we can say it. Our data indicates, even from the nation's report card, we're not getting smarter. And we have been pushing down a whole lot of things. And our data continues to show that our level of productivity, our level of innovation has been dropping. It is not because play, is because we have taken away the idea of play, even into elementary school, right? I think we need to honor that play is where children negotiate. That's where they figure out their language. That's where they figure out, explore. That's where they become curious. That's where a lot of the executive functioning and a lot of the learning happens. And I do think that we need to make sure that we are helping those leaders understand play is learning. For young children to make it anything but that is actually to the detriment of not just children themselves, but to our own country's well-being over time. And our data keeps showing that.
Thank you. It's interesting, in China, 40 years ago, everything was very didactic and everybody was doing, all these little kids are doing the same thing at the same time. And they've now adopted a lot of the play-based stuff that, has been in this country for a very long time. So you're right. I'm glad to hear
it creates innovation, right? And it also creates a level of collaboration. I think that's what we need to understand. It creates a level of collaboration. And for a lot of our major issues we have in the global society, from climate change and so many other things, we need people to be able to collaborate. And play is really one way that children begin to navigate and negotiate how they think and see the world along with other people.
Well, you've given us a lot to think about, and I appreciate you taking the time to come to our little webinar today, and really appreciate it. And I hope at some point I get to meet you in person, because
me too. I mean, I hope so too.
Yeah, that would be great. Okay, so to close us out, we are now going to hear from the newly hired executive director of First 5 California. She may be new to First 5 California, but she's an old friend of ours, Jackie Tu Huang, and she's going to share her closing remarks. So Jackie, take it away.
Ooh, so I hope you meant old in wisdom, not old in age, Michael.
No, I meant our friend for a long time, because when we talk about old, I don't think anybody's got a leg up on me. So.
Wow. I was asked to share some of my reactions, and I'm sitting here just in awe by what I'm going to say is a mic drop by Dr. Iruka and Dr. Farran. I'm getting emotional because when you tell the truth to systems, it's personal to me, right? So Jackie Huang, ED of First Five California, first woman, BIPOC woman of color, English language learner, refugee kid, grew up in poverty. My mom took care of me 0 to 5, right, before I went to school. So all of that, right? How do you value families? And then I'll tell you that, I sat on a CDC board when I was Department of Education. My kids went to preschool. So this work is complicated, right? It is not a one size fit all. And as we move in this new era with First Five California, that when we want to say that we believe that trauma-informed healing center, culturally responsive systems create the safe, stable, nurturing relationships and environments that for healthy development, we mean it. And these are the conversations we need to have, and we need to tell the truth, right? We need to understand that, there is stigma baked into the system, right? Dr. Farran highlighted that in the research, right? What happens that, okay, and again, these are university, researchers who study this and said, okay, something happens when somebody enters a universal K-12 system. And I would say to, kind of Dr. Farran, pushing down a K-12 system to UPK or UTA doesn't work because of everything Dr. Iruka has highlighted, right? Equity, we are here to support equity, address inequity and injustice. And I, as many of you, I also sit on a local school board, and we have to get this right for my families, for my kids in my community, right? What is mixed delivery? And there has to be intentionality across 1,000 school districts. And as I have the conversations locally with multiple responsibilities and jurisdictional oversight, it is valuing a multifaceted system of early care and education. And no, they are not babysitters, right? We operate in a system that has stigmatized early care, right? As though they are not educators. And I will tell you, for me, that my mom is an educator. She is not licensed, but she taught me to read. She taught me to speak another language. She taught me to sing, right? And I would say that there are so many early care providers in our local community who do the same, who support multilingual learning and education that actually really enhances different parts of the brain that are not, to your point, Dr. Olnick, like you've gone back, that it's not just the basic R's, right? When you talk about China's plan, and we have a 100-year plan, that's changed because of what we've learned, right? We have a culture, I'm Vietnamese American, but this conversation about other nations, other countries actually plan over 100 years, and culture is part of that growth. And we're not talking 5, 10, 20, we're talking about a 100-year plan, right? That values kind of play other developmental opportunities to learn. Right. And so I'm going to apologize to Lawanda for not sticking to the talking points, but this is such a salient and relevant conversation. I thank Senator Leyva for authoring this bill because it's about righteousness and justice, right? Not all families are made the same. Not how do we, in our district, we like to say, like by name and by need, when we want to see that child for their holistic needs, right? And First Five California, again, I'm going back to, we want to have a trauma-informed healing center. Let's sit with that, what that means, right? When we talk about a continuum of care and education for our kids, that we already know, the research has already shown that K-12 systems, we have some issues with equity. I mean, we tried to legislate it with LCFF, but there is actually a beauty in what has happened organically in the early care and education space that is really homegrown, community-centered, family-centered, and sincerely engages families and caregivers, right, in the process. And somehow in the K-12 system, and a lot of parents cry when they drop their kid off at kindergarten, including you send the babies off, right? And then we just trust it. But we already know that may not be, especially post-pandemic, it might not be the best way to actually create an environment to actually push kids to see them whole and holistically meet all their needs. So I could go on for days. I know I have 5 minutes. I'm looking at the talking points and I have to push it back. But I want to actually challenge you to see if we can have a part 2 of this conversation, because I think this is salient and real to what we are doing now in the state of California as we talk about quality and inequality, and how do we address that in a very thoughtful way that is different and unique than what we've known in the past. So I will end with that, and I thank Dr. Farran and Dr. Iruka and CCRC for having this conversation, because it's just the beginning and not the end.
Great. And Jackie, I have to say the biggest thing that Dr. Iruka said that I think that we really need to pay attention to is about the implementation. It's not just about the policy. And that seems to be the place that we get stuck at a lot. So thank you so much for joining us today. And I made a note that we need to meet at some point in the near future. So on that note, I'm going to pass this over to our Chief Strategy Officer to say goodbye. Donna, it's on you.
All right, well, thank you all so much. We know this was a lot of information in a very short period of time. We will be posting the video of this webinar, as well as we're going to go back. We didn't get to everyone's questions, but we will work with our presenters to answer your follow-up questions and post that as well. And thank you to my team at CCRC, especially Dr. LaWanda Wesley, who pulled together this group today, and to our presenters. It really is an important conversation. I agree with Mike that the work ahead is making sure we implement programs that are good for all of our children and families and meet them where they are and really help them grow and thrive. So thank you all for your time today, and we will be in touch with everyone to get you information about all of the follow-ups. Thank you.